Ilia Topuria is going to retire. He says by 30 to 32 years old, he's out. And this got a bunch of mixed responses from fans. Some fans think it's a good move. It's a smart decision to retire on top, right? It's better to retire in your prime than after your prime, where usually that's where you start to lose and get knocked out and submitted and all that stuff. And sometimes when you start losing, it convinces you to keep fighting again because you want to get it back, right? And you believe you can make the adjustments in order to turn your career around. But then there's some other fans saying that he's scared and he doesn't want to fight. He wants to be inactive. He's not going to be a great champion. And this is also stemming off the fact that he said he's going to fight in like 8 months. He was saying that he wants to fight in October or November. And that would make him, I guess, like a normal champion in terms of activity, right? Usually champions fight like twice a year. And that would give him mostly 2 fights a year. And if he's going to retire in 3 to 5 years, that could be anywhere from 4 to 8 more fights as a champion. Now, do we believe him? Fighters will say stuff like this and then they'll stick around for another 5 years, or they will retire and then come back later. It's usually the second retirement that's permanent, not the first. So let's say Topuria does retire at 32 years old. He sees how the sport is playing out. There's another superstar that comes up and then he wants to make his comeback against that guy. That's what I expect to happen for Topuria if he does retire, but he could be like Khabib. Khabib said he's going to retire, and he retired. He never came back, even though there was a lot of money for him to come back, and he never did it. He stuck to his word. And that might also explain why he's calling out all these different fighters, from Conor McGregor to Max Holloway to Canelo to Khabib to Islam. He is just calling out the biggest names in the sport, and it shows that he has big aspirations in terms of like what he sees for himself in the future, but also knowing that he's probably not going to be around that long. But you would think if he's not going to be around that long, he would want to fight more actively so he can get these fights, because one title defense is not enough for him to step up to 155 or fight Conor or fight Khabib or whatever. None of that would really make any sense. Like Volkanovski, who was the previous champion, he defended his belt multiple times before he went up to 155. And Ilia Topuria would surely have to do something similar, unless he explodes as a superstar and then give him the Conor McGregor treatment. I think that'll be the only way the UFC will be lenient in him jumping divisions and getting super fights. But there's no way he fights Canelo. I don't think he fights Conor. I don't think he fights Khabib. He could fight Islam in the future, probably towards the end of his championship run. So when he says he's going to retire in 3 to 5 years, that could be after he gets the second belt, hypothetically, if he does it. And honestly, in my opinion, I don't think that's a bad plan. Fighters should be retiring in their prime, or at least like when they're on top of their game. Fighters retiring at the top of their game is something that's quite wise, because we know a whole lot of fighters that stick around way too long. We know more fighters that stay too long than fighters that retire on top. Andrei Arlovsky and Bigfoot are still fighting to this day. Arlovsky's 45 years old. He was the heavyweight champion in 2005, almost 20 years ago. Bigfoot Silva has almost been fighting in totality for 20 years. His prime was way back in the early 2010s. And right now he's on an 8-fight loss streak, almost all by knockout. Tony Ferguson just talked about how he's going to keep going until the wheels fall off. And he's had one of the biggest declines in the sport's history. From one of the best lightweights in the world to a guy who can't even win a fight against Paddy Pimblett. There are anomalies like Jim Miller, right? There's not a whole lot of fighters that can do what Jim Miller is doing, which is why he is a legend in this game without ever winning a belt. The sad reality of sticking around too long is this. Like, we see it in real time, and we've seen it all throughout history, not only in MMA but also in boxing. These guys stick around way too long and get further brain damage, destroy their legacies, and that's not what Ilia Topuria is looking to do. Ilia Topuria is probably looking at guys like Khabib, like GSP before he made his comeback, guys who retired on top. Right? They could have went more, fought more contenders, make more money, and risk their legacy, but instead, he sees things a different way, and maybe he's looking to make some kind of business move out of this, right? He's gonna secure himself before he exits the sport so he doesn't have to worry about the monetary side, and he can have his legacy intact. He's on the whole loop of interviews right now. He's getting interviewed by everybody. He's all over the place in Spain. He just had the honorary kickoff for a Real Madrid game, and he's only 27 years old. One of, if not the biggest sports organization in the entire world outside of the Olympics. But this is only true if he continues to win, which of course he believes he's going to, but is it reality? Does Topuria continue to win? Does he beat all these contenders and retires undefeated in the sport as the featherweight champion? He's looking to get that lightweight belt as well. If he does all that stuff, I mean, that's some legendary stuff. In fact, looking at his record right now, he's 15-0. If he gets, let's say, 7 more championship wins before he retires, he would be 22-0 and about 32 years old. 2-weight world champion, the second most title defenses in featherweight history. There's no more he would need to do in this sport. So it is a plan that does seem logical in the point of retirement. but it's a very difficult path to go through. And he is the champ. He's looking to do some great things. I don't know if he would be able to do that. Who would be the lightweight champion at that time? Islam would probably be, in his mid to late 30s at that time, and I don't even think he would be sticking around that long. He also expresses his desires to retire early as well. I think it was back in November or December. He said he's going to retire in like 2 years. So it won't be Islam Makhachev if we take his word for it. It could be Arman Tsarukyan, right? It could be Arman who's the champion at that time. And then we get a super fight between Topuria and Arman or something, or whoever is holding the belt. It'd be a very difficult task for Topuria, but regarding the featherweight division, I do think he's going to be a dominant champion. I think he's going to beat most of these guys, but he might run into a hurdle against Max Holloway. And the fight with Yair and Ortega confirmed this to me. If those are the next two best guys in this weight class, and you do have Movsar Evloev, who's stylistically at a disadvantage against Topuria, I just don't see anybody beating Topuria at 145 if it's not Max. So that's all of his title defenses. He can get all of those in the next several years. The lightweight belt is the one that's really difficult for Topuria because he will be small in that weight class, as we've seen him go up before. Everybody there is going to be bigger and stronger than he is. And he's going to have to completely rely on his skills, technique, and IQ in order to get ahead of that bigger champion. So it's an interesting take from Topuria. I did not expect him to already plan his retirement and making it that soon, but I do respect it after seeing all these other fighters stick around for way too long and destroy their health and their careers. And knowing what's ahead for Topuria, I mean, at 32 years old, I don't know what else will be there in the sport for him to do, because he's going to headline a main event at a stadium in Spain. That's one thing off the bucket list. And only one event was ever at a stadium. Ilia will be the second. And it would be in his country, not like Ronda and Holly Holm that fought in Australia. Neither of them are Australian. Topuria will be headlining in Spain, which is where he lives. He says he wants to fight for the lightweight title, and if he continues on a run at featherweight, getting 3 to 4 title defenses, he's going to fight for that lightweight belt. And I do think if he can get past Max, he's going to get those 3 or 4 title defenses, knowing that this division is not at his skill level. So that's another thing off the bucket list, fighting and winning that title, even though it's extremely difficult for him to do, especially knowing he would be small for that weight class. The other thing he wants to do is get this super fight, whether it's against Conor, Khabib, or Canelo. And I don't think he gets any of those fights, honestly. Conor's a bit too old, and he just doesn't warrant a fight with Topuria at all, knowing that there are other contenders for Topuria to fight. Khabib is not going to make his comeback. If he wasn't going to come back against Floyd and Conor the second time, and Charles Oliveira, he's not going to come back for Ilia Topuria. The boxing fights are not going to happen. There's no way Topuria fights someone like Canelo, who's also way bigger than he is. Honestly, the Conor fight is more likely than the other two, and that is still very unlikely to happen. And I'm predicting there's going to be a trend. I think as fighters make more money, the earlier they're going to retire from the sport. Fighters are becoming more business savvy than the previous fighters were. They're learning from the past fighters' mistakes. Therefore, they're going to be able to secure themselves outside of fighting after making all the money they do inside of fighting. And I think Topuria is going to be a clear example of that. Not only is he an evolution of the fighter in the cage, but he also might be an evolution of the fighter outside the cage as well. We see glimpses of this with Sean O'Malley, about him saying before that he was going to fight certain contenders unless he got paid more. You're starting to see these younger fighters understand the business part of this game, whereas all those older guys did not really understand it at all. They were all just like barbarians in this game, whereas now there's a lot more educated decisions going on. We saw that with the whole training thing. There have been several fighters who stopped sparring, which has been completely frowned upon from the older generation. And we're going to see more fighters change the usual decisions that we're used to seeing from them. And I'm expecting more fighters to retire at a younger age. Islam Makhachev is talking about he's going to retire pretty soon. Ilia Topuria now is saying that he's going to retire pretty soon. I imagine Sean O'Malley is going to be similar too. I don't think he's going to stick around that long. It's a new age in the fight game.